Do you struggle with color matching? Does the whole idea of color mixing and matching intimidate you to the point of keeping you from painting? Do you view paint mixing as a dreaded task to be avoided? Do you struggle to find colors that work right out of the tube? If this sounds like you, then this video is designed to help you. Hi, Bones here from Bones Art Studio, and today's video is designed to help make color mixing something you look forward to and enjoy rather than something you dread and avoid. Let's go on over to the palette and get started, and I'll show you how easy color mixing can be. And through the miracle of modern technology, I needn't even move, and behold, the palette. Okay, I think the reason many beginners are intimidated by the notion of color mixing is because it seems complicated because of how we were taught. We're usually taught by someone very well intentioned, but they use something that we're all familiar with, especially as artists, we're familiar with these. They use a visual to try and help us understand color theory by using a color wheel. And that is a very complicated looking device for most of us, especially when we're like 8 or 9 years old. Let's take that whole experience and put it aside for today, because I'm going to show you how easy most color mixing really is. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that my audience knows virtually nothing about color mixing. So forgive me and bear with me if some of you already understand the basics, which is probably most of you, but I think it's important to start from square one. Also, before I begin, let me reiterate that I am a representational painter for the most part. And I attempt to accurately render what I see in nature, sometimes to a higher degree and sometimes to a lesser degree. But I am almost always intending to represent nature as I see it. Knowing this, one of the most valuable lessons that I learned along my experience, actually, is that colors in nature are very muted. They are not vibrant at all. So I learned very quickly that the colors that we see out of the tube, for the most part, are just too high chroma. And while we're talking about chroma, let's go over the three things that we are doing when we are color mixing. We are looking at three aspects. We are looking at a hue, a chroma, and a value. A hue is what color family is it? And I apologize right off the bat, by the way, for this very hot spot on the palette. I tried many different angles of light and lights on, lights off, and this is the best I could get for the palette. So I do apologize, but this is my white. Anyway, the chroma right out of the tube, you can see this is very high chroma yellow, high chroma red, high chroma blue. That's the intensity, okay, of the hue. The hue is it yellow? Is it red? Is it blue? Is it orange? Is it green? Is it purple? Okay, that's what hue means. It's a fancy word for what color is it, okay? Value is how light or dark something is. This is a very high value. This is a very low value. So when we're mixing, we're thinking of those three things because we're trying to match something that matches the hue, the chroma, and the value. Now, just bear in mind, we're not going to get too in depth with respect to these three and which one is most important, but understand this right off the bat. If you are a painter or any kind of visual artist, the most important of hue, chroma, and value is the actual value. That's the most important. That's why we can take a monochrome something, right, if we're doing a drawing in charcoal, and make it look very real. That's because we know how to use value and value relationships correctly. Okay? That's the important thing. But what we're looking at today is having mostly to do with the hue and the chroma. Okay? Let's start with the basics. And I urge everyone who's just beginning to start with a very simple color palette. What the colors that we choose from our tubes, we refer to as the color palette. So my color palette today is a mixing white, a cadmium yellow medium, a cadmium red medium, and an ultramarine blue. That's my color palette. I strongly suggest that beginners all use some variation of what I'm showing you right now. A white, a yellow, a red, and a blue. I think your best place to start is with something like a cadmium yellow medium, a cadmium red medium, and an ultramarine blue. Once you learn how to mix just using these three colors and white, you'll be able to add pigments to your color palette to make it more efficient for you to mix. I'm assuming right now that you really want to learn how to mix. And the best way to do it is by just using primary colors. And I can show you even by using these primary colors, because I'm sure there are some people saying, how come there's no black here? What happens when you have to do something that's black or dark? You can mix the black from these colors, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. But let's start right at the beginning, and that is, let's make our own color wheel, so to speak. It's not really going to be a color wheel, but we're going to just do a couple of things to represent what we see on a color wheel. So let's take a yellow. Let's take some red. Okay. And let's take some blue. Okay. And everybody does know, I'm sure, that when we mix red and yellow, we are going to get orange. So let's do that now. Let's mix some yellow and some red. And we are going to mix an orange. Now, this orange isn't a high chroma orange. Not the same as if we took cadmium orange out of the tube. That would be a very high chroma, but I got news for you. That's pretty high chroma when it comes to nature. So we don't really need a high chroma orange for most renderings of nature. That's going to be high enough for most things. Not necessarily everything, but for most things. And even when you're starting, even if you can't quite match the intensity of a color, don't worry about that to start. Just understand that if you needed to, you could. But it's best to just come as close as you can with these three primaries until you get really good at mixing. And that's going to happen really fast if you just do this. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to mix some blue and yellow. And we're going to make ourselves a green. And what we're mixing right now are called secondary colors. And this green is not a very high intensity green. But guess what? It's too high for most greens we find in nature. Grass is usually not quite this green intensity. It might be lighter in value, in which case we would just add a little more yellow to it. But it's not going to usually be high chroma. Okay. And we're going to mix our third secondary color, which is purple. Or violet. And this one's going to be a little bit dark. It'll be a little hard to see it, but what we're going to do is add some white to it so that we can really tell. I could already tell I want a little bit more. I want a tiny little bit more. Actually, that's pretty good. I like that purple. So if we're unsure what this color really looks like, we can always take a tiny little bit of white. Okay, we can take a tiny little bit of white and we can take some of this color and mix it, and we can get a good idea of where that lies on the color spectrum. So just to give you an idea, so that's the purple right now. I'm going to take a little bit of blue and I'm going to just mix a little bit of white with the blue, and I'll show you that there's a difference here. Okay. Pretty significant difference. I'll even we'll bring it to the same value, right? We talk about value. This value is darker than this value. Let's raise the value of this one. May as well take the opportunity to discuss value just a little bit. And that's about the same value. About. They're not quite, but it's about. So you see the difference? It's hard to tell sometimes when we use the dark colors what they really look like. But we just, from our primaries, mixed our secondary colors. And for rendering nature, we're not going to need more than this chroma. We just don't need it. Because in nature, colors are muted. Okay, speaking of muted colors, here's where we're going to get into some more fun stuff. And that is learning how to, I'm going to say, gray colors down for making colors less vibrant or less chromatic or less intense, I usually say let's gray a color down. So that may come out. I'm not necessarily going to say as I'm doing this, let's lower the chroma or lower the intensity, or I'm probably just going to say things like we need to gray this down a little more. Okay, so let's start with this. How to make colors less intense? Well, we could take black and white and make a gray, and we can take that intensity down. We could use just white because white reduces intensity. But what I normally do when I am painting is sometimes I will use a black or a gray. Very rarely, though, will I do that. I like using what are called complementary colors. And a complementary color is nothing more than this. We have 3 primaries. If we're talking about the primaries, the complementary color of each primary is the mixture of the other 2 primaries. Therefore, the complement to yellow is purple, because it's the mixture of the other 2 primaries. The complementary color of red is green, because it is the mixture of the other 2 primaries. The complement to blue is orange, because it is the mixture of the other 2 primaries. When we are talking about going the other way, hey, I need the complement to orange. Orange is made from red and yellow. I need to add the 3rd primary. I need to put a little blue in here to gray it down. And I'm going to show you how easy all of this stuff is. And we're going to work right from these puddles or piles, however you want to think of them. So let's do the orange, right? And like I said, it's not an intense orange to begin with, but we are going to knock that orange down by just taking a tiny, tiny little bit of blue. In fact, that's probably even too much blue. Here's a little bit of blue, and we are going to knock that orange down. Now, you see how quickly we were able to neutralize an orange? We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to mix. I'm going to start mixing over here a little bit. Just getting a little crowded over here. Let's say we wanted to mute a green. Okay? If we want to mute a green, we are going to take a little bit of red. Don't even need much. Don't even need much. Very little. Yes, let's do this. Let me pull this stuff away from here. I apologize. You see already, just from mixing that tiny little bit of red, that green is also already muted down, but we're going to mute it some more. We're going to desaturate it just a little bit more. Take a tiny little bit of red. Not much. And it's desaturating it. And if we take quite a bit of red, which again isn't even really that much, we're working closer to, we commonly refer to these as going toward brown. I'm sure you've been told if you mix the 3 primaries, you get brown. It's kind of true, It's kind of true. You're really mixing toward gray, because if you mix them equally neutral, you're going to come down to a gray, and I'm going to show you how to do that too. But right now, let's do this violet we have here, this purple. Let's take a little bit of the purple, put it over here. Let's take a little bit of yellow. Cadmium yellow, by the cadmium colors are very high tinting strength is what it's called. It means they're kind of like bullies. You don't need a lot of them. A lot of the pigment quickly takes over many other pigments. Generally speaking, cadmiums. What I'm actually using here are hues. They're not actual cadmiums, which is another thing I should mention. Cadmiums themselves can be quite expensive. You don't have to start by buying actual cadmiums. You can start with just using what's called a cadmium hue, which is a dye as opposed to actual cadmium pigment. And they're pretty close. When you get better at painting, and you may want to start using actual cadmiums. But you don't need to do that right away. Some people argue that you should, just to get used to the tinting strength, but you'll quickly become used to a tinting strength when you see all of a sudden, wow, I need a tiny dab of this to change this value, or to change this chroma, or to change this hue. Just know that when you're starting out, I would encourage you to save some money, because you're going to mix a lot of paint, and just buy the hues, the cadmium hues. Anyway, so we're going to use a little bit of yellow in this purple, because it's the complement of purple. And let's do a little bit more of that purple, because it's almost brought it to a green. So I'm going to mix a little bit of white in here also. I'm going to mix a little bit of white in there, and I'm going to show you something. Get ready to be awed. You see how gray that is? That is already very nearly gray. It's a bit of a gray to the green side right now. But that's what I mean. That's why I say you're always mixing toward gray. And I could do the same thing with any of these mixtures as well. If I wanted to spend enough time, I can bring them to gray. No problem. As a matter of fact, let's do another thing. I briefly touched on black. You may get to a point where you want to have black on your palette for a number of reasons. But for right now, I would encourage you not to use black, but to mix your own black. I'm going to mix some black just using the 3 primaries, okay? I'm going to mix some yellow, and red, and blue. We're going to mix, actually, we're going to go a little heavier on the blue. Go a little heavier on the blue. There are a couple of colors, once you start getting better and you're much more confident with your mixing capabilities, you'll start adding other pigments. So instead of mixing a yellow ochre or a black, you might want to put yellow ochre and black on your palette. But for now, let's talk about mixing what's called a chromatic black. So a chromatic black, we call it a chromatic black because it's mixed from other colors and does not use. And we're going to need, obviously, in order to get the black, we're going to need a lot more blue in this, aren't we? So let's do that. It means we're not, chromatic black means we are not using black pigment. But we are going to mix a very black color. Okay, so this is falling. And again, that cadmium yellow is very strong. It's a bit of a bully. So you see that it's really turning green, which means we need a complement in there to get it toward that neutral, to get it toward that black. Complement of green is red. So we're going to take some red. And again, it's probably going to turn closer to a burnt umber right now, which is where we're going. I can see already. It's going to be closer to an umber. And still not quite a black. But we're going to bring it to black. And this is what I mean about, getting good at color mixing. I never relied on formulas, by the way, and I don't think you should think formulaically about color mixing. It's better to exercise your visual skills. What does it need? It definitely needs, so now we're going a little bit toward the orange. You see a lot of red, but I also still see a lot of yellow in there. So the complement of orange is blue. And I already know we have to go darker, so it's going to be blue. Let's put some more blue in here. And we are very close to a black right now. So okay, now that is, let's mix it a tiny little bit more. That's pretty close to a black. And I'm going to show you how close to a black we are by adding some white to this. Let's take a little bit of white, put it down here. Let's start mixing this into this. And we're getting a beautiful gray. I mean, that is a gray as gray can be. That's almost like mixing black and white. And because you won't have black on your palette, it's going to appear like a black out of the tube. So I encourage you, when you start, just get used to using these three primaries, because that's all you're going to need for a lot of paintings. If you're I'm tongue-tied. It doesn't matter what you're painting. If you're trying to paint nature or you're doing non-representational, these chromas are still very high and they'll work for any painting. I want to go over really quick how again to think about when we're matching something, okay? Because we haven't done any matching, but you can clearly see we can get a black. We can actually get different greens. You know, we have a green there, which is already a muted green, but if we added some white to it, that's another green, right? We can get a lot of different hues and chromas and obviously values by using a very limited palette. Let's do one quick thing, and then I'm going to end this video. And what we'll do in an upcoming video is we will get a little bit more in depth. Now, you don't have to do what I'm doing right now, which is basically wasting my paints. Oh, and by the way, I should say this too. I use oil paints, and I'm using oil paints right now. I primarily use oil paints, but this way of thinking, this methodology, will work with anything. It will work with oils, acrylics, gouache, watercolor, egg tempera. It doesn't matter, because color mixing is color mixing. There are some exceptions, but I don't want to get into those right now because they get a little bit technical and they get really geeky, and you're probably going to discover some of these exceptions when you start playing with things like phthalocyanines and maybe alizarin crimson. You're going to notice, how did I just mix a blue, or how did I just mix a yellow? That defies logic. And yes, to an extent, on its face, it will defy logic, but it doesn't actually. And it's not something we're going to talk about right now. For all intents and purposes, you cannot mix a blue, you cannot mix a red, and you cannot mix a yellow. Those are what we're going to start with. But I want to show you how easy it is to match something in nature. And I just happen to have something from nature, and we're going to, oops, oh, that might work. I have a leaf. Okay. This leaf that I got from outside, first thing we're going to do, we could really start anywhere. We could literally start with blue with this leaf and get to match it, even by starting with blue. Okay? We see what I would probably say is a yellow. So we're good to start with a yellow, but it also, to my eye, it skews toward green. And that's why I said we could start with a blue and get to this color. In fact, let's start with a blue. And I'm going to show you that even you can't really mess this up. So there's some blue. We're going to take some yellow. Obviously, it's a lot more yellow than it is blue. So we have to make sure that we use a lot more yellow than blue. But if we started with blue and we started to mix in yellow, That's too yellow. You see what I'm saying? The chroma is even still, right now, as it is. This chroma, this intensity is higher than that leaf. So let's put a little bit more blue in here and get closer to a green. Okay. And let's talk a little bit about value. So which one is lighter and which one is darker? Well, it seems like that's a pretty simple answer. This is darker than what we're trying to match. So we have two ways to lighten something up. We can do it with white and we can do it with yellow. Because both of these, and I use yellow quite a bit to lighten. You can use either one. And I might say right now, we could go with yellow. But because that's going to make this even more intense in yellow color. It's going to raise the intensity. And this is not very intense. So let's use some white to try and match this value. And you see how much brighter white is than that leaf. So let's use a little bit of white mixed in here. Now, we're already getting pretty close to matching. I know it's tough because this leaf is a little bit wrinkled and it's catching light, and it's a little bit hard probably for you to tell. But I'm going to put this right next to it and see if I can get... It's pretty close right now. But our value, this value, is darker still than, let's say, we're trying to match in here. Okay? We are going to... And let's see about intensity. It looks pretty close. To my eye, it looks like it's going to need to be muted a little bit more. So the complement of green is red. If we were going to mute this, we're going to use some red. But here's the first thing we're going to do. Let's get the value. Try and get that value spot on. First, let's take a little bit more white. And we're going to mix some more white in here. And let's see where we are here. I still think that we're close on value right now. I think we're still a tiny little bit. Yeah, our value is pretty close. But we're not matched yet. That's not a match. It's close, but it's not a match. This, actually, to me, looks like it needs to come down a little bit. It needs a tiny, tiny little bit of red. A tiny little bit of red. Like literally. Not much red, but a little bit of red. And maybe, oops, I apologize for hitting that. And maybe a little bit of white. Now, here's a way we can test it, right? By the way, I do a lot of mixing with my palette knife, but I also do mix with a brush. I do both, but I do a lot of mixing with a palette knife. If you're uncomfortable mixing with a palette knife, you can use a brush to do all of this. I usually just, especially for demonstrations or if I'm mixing batches of color, I use a palette knife. One of my favorite artists never uses a palette knife. I've never seen him use a palette knife. He's always using a brush. There's more than one way to match a color note. You don't need to use any one particular tool necessarily. Many roads can lead to that match. I like to use a palette knife. If you prefer using a brush, use a brush. Let's take a little bit of this color and let's put a little bit right on this leaf. So that's pretty close. That's pretty close. I could mix it a little bit further if I wanted to, but let me tell you something. When you even get this close, and it's going to be very realistic in your painting. If I wanted to, I would probably put a little bit more red in here. I'm going to do it, and I'll just show you that a tiny little bit of red. I may even have gone a little bit overboard on the red. We may have to go a little bit more into the white, but maybe not. Let's see. I don't know. That looks almost pretty good. Let's see. Oh, that is pretty close. I apologize that it is a little bit hard to see, but that, let me take it off. Let me take it off and see if I can show you how close that is. Because I just want to show you really how easy color mixing can be. So come on, focus. It doesn't like the glare. But trust me, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. I apologize. I'm still trying to work these camera things out. I'm still new to YouTube and the technology. Okay. That's how simple it is, really, to mix and match color. It looks intimidating, but it's not hard. It's not hard at all, and it is fun. I really do actually like mixing colors to the extent that one of the things that I do, believe it or not, when I am bored, is I get my little swatches from the hardware store, the paint store, out, and I play match that color. And I'll tell you what, if you do things like this, you could do it with anything. You don't need to even take a trip to the hardware store. You could use a magazine. You could use anything. Take a piece of fruit, try and match the colors that you see in the fruit. Of course, it's not always a color. It's variations of a hue. But I just wanted to share with you how simple it really is to mix and match. It's not hard once you get rid of all of the noise surrounding the color wheel. It's very simple. You use your 3 primaries and you learn how to mix from those primaries and a white. I said I was using mixing white, titanium, any of the whites work. Flake white, titanium white, whatever white you want to use. There are many different whites to choose from. Titanium white is probably the most popular. I would use titanium white. I happen to use mixing white, which is, it does use titanium white, but its tinting strength is a little bit less. It's a little less opaque. And I happen to be using that for this demonstration. I don't always use that. I use titanium white, I use flake white, I use a bunch of different whites. Depends on what I'm doing. The point simply is this: mixing color should not be intimidating, and I just proved to you that it's really not hard to do. What you need to start doing is training your eye to see, is this more blue? Is this more red? Is this more yellow? Is what I'm mixing, does it need more blue? Does it need more red? Does it need more yellow? Or does it need more orange? Does it need more green? Does it need more purple? You really don't even need to think beyond those terms. You really don't. It's so easy. You just need to think about the primaries and the secondaries, and then how light or how dark is it. I've heard it argued that one should focus first on value, and I certainly don't disagree with that. I think that getting the value spot on is way more important than the actual hue and intensity, because you could even change it from a green to a red. If it's the same value, it's going to look right to your eye. Go out, get yourself the 3 primaries plus white, and just start color mixing. Take any object you find around you and just try to match it. And you'll see very quickly that you can match color, and it's not going to take you long to learn how to do. And once you do that, we can start talking about other things like whether a color is warm or cool, because temperature does start to play a role when you become more advanced, but I don't want to talk about that yet. That's going to be in a later video. We're going to conclude this with just start mixing. Don't be intimidated. There's nothing you can mess up. Get yourself a big enough palette and just have fun with it, because it really can be quite fun trying to match. Don't get frustrated. Just think about, does it need more red? Does it need more yellow? Does it need more blue? Does it need more green? Does it need more orange? Does it need more purple? That's all you need to think about for now. We're going to follow this video up with a little bit more of an advanced color mixing video very soon. I'd like to thank all of you who have subscribed for subscribing. I'd like to ask any of you that haven't subscribed to please consider subscribing. Hit the like button if you liked this video, and I'll be coming back very soon with something more advanced. Please leave any comments or questions down in the comments section. If you have any questions, you want me to address something, if I was unclear, if you're confused about something, leave a comment. I will answer it. Anyway, I thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon here on Bones Art Studio, where we talk about all things art. Thanks for tuning in.